Welcome to another episode of Wired In with Appaveli. Today we're going to talk about C# programming language. So you're going to see me go through some slides. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, you can follow along. The slides will be available on my GitHub page, which is available in the show notes, with various other links. So let's get started. Let's get wired in. So what is C#? C# is a general purpose, type safe, declarative, imperative, functional, and object-oriented programming language. It's a lot of things, right? But we're going to focus more on the object-oriented side the next few episodes. Today we'll just go over the basics. C# was created in 2000 by Microsoft. So C# has been around for almost 20 years now, when you think about it. Wow, 19 years. And I think version 7.3 is available now. So a lot of iterations over the years, a lot of enhancements, improvements to the language. C# was designed by Anders Hellsberg, and C# basically simplifies a lot of things that were difficult to do in C++, like lambdas, enumerations, and a lot of other different complicated tasks in C++. Also, too, in C# you can actually access memory. In C# you can access memory. You can't do that in Java, according to the documentation, according to the C# documentation. So C# is really easy to learn, really easy to pick up, and it's really used to build a lot of applications for a lot of different platforms. So you can not only build applications for Windows, you can build applications for iOS, Android, pretty much any platform. And you have the .NET Framework, .NET Core, you have Xamarin. So once you learn C#, you can branch off and learn different frameworks to build whatever application you want to build. So more C#. Like I said, we're going to focus more on the object-oriented language programming side of C#. C# covers encapsulation, which is information hiding. We'll go over these concepts in detail when we start talking about like classes and interfaces, and you'll see the use of encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. We'll probably do an episode on all three of these at the same time. So, how are C# programs compiled? So, it is a compiled language. It's not an interpreted language like Python or JavaScript. Those are scripting languages. Even though you can write expressions in C# like you can in the other languages, but this is compiled. So when C# programs are executed, the assembly is loaded to the common language runtime. And you want to know more about this in detail, I'll post a link where there's a diagram and it shows how the program is compiled to basically to machine code. And then the common language runtime performs just-in-time compilation, basically to convert the intermediate language code, which is like in the middle. It's kind of like it kind of communicates between the two into native machine code or native machine instructions. It also provides other services related to automatic garbage collection, exception handling, and resource management. Code that is executed by the Common Language Runtime is sometimes referred to as managed code. So managed code is basically secure. So it's compiled on top of the .NET framework. If it's unmanaged code, it's basically compiled to that machine, but we don't know if it's safe because memory's not being managed. We don't know how resources are being allocated on that system. So it's best to have it compiled with managed code as opposed to unmanaged code. So how do you get started? You want to start coding in C#. Download Visual Studio 2017 here. Here's the link. You can just click on it and it'll give you instructions on how to install Visual Studio, and you can just start coding. But I would recommend that you start writing console applications first, especially if you're new to programming. And that's what we'll go through on this episode, is writing a basic console application. And here is a reference. I'll probably add more here because I'm sure I left out a link or two, but it'll also be available in the show notes. But here's a reference basically introducing you to the C# language. So now let's open Visual Studio. So if you have Visual Studio installed, it's pretty straightforward. You can go to File, New, Project, and I just loaded Visual Studio, so it's actually taking a second. Okay. And you'll have so many options, but focus on the Visual C#. I know you'll see Visual Basic, C++, Visual F#, but focus on Visual C#, and you'll see Get Started, Console App. Desktop app is a graphical user interface, then the web app, and then the mobile app is, using Xamarin. But let's focus on console app. Then you can name it whatever you want. I simply named it episode 2 for simplicity. So since I have the project already open, let's dive into some code. Once you open Visual Studio and your project is open, make sure you kind of look at your environment to familiarize yourself with it. There's a lot of things you can do, a lot of shortcuts. A lot of things can be overwhelming. So when you're not coding, just click on different options and see what you can do. You might not even use a lot of these options. I don't even use, so you might not even use all these options, but it's just good to know that it's there. So on the right side, on the right window, the Solution Explorer is where your files are for the project. So you have the properties that has the assembly information. We'll click on that. Okay, is it going to open? Okay. Yep, this is just the assembly information. You can read that. So let's exit. And then you have references. So basically, references are basically if you add libraries to your project. We'll go over that later. When you open when you start a new project, you're basically going to have the libraries that already comes with C#. So you don't have to add those, like the system namespace. The system namespace basically contains the fundamental classes, base classes, and like commonly used reference data types to write applications. So if you don't have the system namespace, you're not going to be able to write any applications. But if you need to add more stuff, you can always add stuff to the namespace. And we'll open up the program class, and here are the namespaces. So using system. If you hover over namespace system, then you have system collection generic, link, text. Now, these are kind of great because we're not using any classes or methods. So once we start using them, they'll be highlighted like system. So the first class when you start a new project, it's called program, but you can rename this to whatever you want. And then when you create new classes, you can name them program 2, depending on what you're trying to build or what you want to build. And here we have the main method. So every C# application has to have an entry point. And basically the entry point basically just executes the program. You only need one entry point. You can't have two, and it has to be static. So if you're creating classes, you can instantiate objects in this main method and it'll execute. You can call methods in the main method to execute. And we'll go over more in detail using classes and methods, so you'll really see that this is where you have to execute everything. Now here we're just coding, and I'll get into all this in a little bit. And it's going to execute everything that's typed here. So when you first start this program, you're going to get, this is commented when I was working on this. So let me uncomment this. Okay. So the code provided will print hello world to the console. So basically this is your first application. So you press Control F5 to debug, start without debugging to run your app. So Control KC, we're going to comment that. So let's run this. Matter of fact, let me comment the rest of this code so we can go step by step. And if you want to, and basically a comment, basically, it's like a note. For example, here, this is basically explaining what this line does. And comments are good when you want to structure your program or remind yourself what you want to add. It's not going to be compiled, so you don't have to worry about it. And usually, like we have code here, by me commenting this code, it's not going to execute. It's only going to run. It should only run this. So console.writeLine hello world read key. Let's hit Control F5. Give it a second here. All right. All right. Says hello world. First application. So you're probably like, okay, what is this? It's basically just printing a string. And console basically, actually you can hover over and it tells you what it is. It represents the standard input output error streams for console applications. It can't be inherited. One thing cool about this, if you hover over this, you can click on it and it will open up the actual console class, and you can see all the methods in here. Now, don't touch this or change anything, but this is something for you to look at here. That's pretty cool, right? So yeah, all you have to do is hold the control key on your keyboard, hover over, and you can click on it. You can do that with the methods too. It'll take you right to the method writeLine. So basically it's writing a string value. And it can take in multiple arguments. So basically we're just writing to the console. and the read key, basically the next character. So when we press a button, it will close the application. So we're going to comment this code, and we're just going to get right into strings and chars. So let's uncomment this. All right. So first, we're going to talk about chars. So a char represents a character. So like the letter A, B, C, etc. So to declare a char, you use the type char, C-H-R. And again, it's a struct. Char is a struct. Hover over it and click on it, and it'll let you know what's available in this struct and where it inherits and implements. So this implements from multiple interfaces. And again, even if you go, you can just hover over, like hold control and hover over. You can just click on pretty much anything, and it'll take you directly to that class or function. So these are also available methods that you can use for char. And one of the methods that we're using in program is lower. So let's go back to is lower. Well, first let me explain this. So use the char keyword, and then you create the variable name, and I just named it char A1 because I'm basically spelling out my name in chars characters. So char CHA1, you can name the variables whatever you want, and you use single quotes to declare the char, to assign a char. So I have 8. So here, when we write, again, let me comment this. All right, one step at a time. So when I print this to the console, I'm going to call the char struct, and I'm going to call the is lower function, and I'm going to pass in one of my variables, which is CHA1, and I'm going to check to see if it's an uppercase. No, is it a lowercase and is it uppercase? Yeah. So first it's going to check to see if it's lower, and then it's going to check to see if it's an uppercase. So as we can see, this is an uppercase A, right? So hit Control F5 to start without debugging. Oh, wait. Start without debugging. False, true. So if you look here, console.writeLine is lower, false, is upper, true. So basically, you can just play around with different methods and see what you can do with chars. So I'll post links in the show notes. So after that, let's comment this and go to the next. We're going to convert a char to a string. So basically, again, we're going to declare a char. I call it CHX. And I'm going to assign it a char of X. So then I'm going to create a string, call it new X. I'm going to set that equal to CHX. And then I'm going to call the toString method. And that's how you convert it to a string. And it's just going to print out X to the console. Pretty simple, right? Now also in the console, you can write simple applications to take in basic input. So let's do that. So here in the console, it's going to write what is your name, and then we're going to create a variable string, name it input for simplicity. Now you can name these variables whatever you want, but you want to choose something for simplicity. Console.read line, so it's going to read the input that you type, and then we're going to print the input to the console. So Control F5. What is your name? Appaveli. Right? So when I hit enter, it's going to print out Appaveli. So now we're going to talk about strings. So what is a string? Let's go here. It represents a series of characters. That's all the string is. You probably use strings more than chars. I mean, chars, you'll use them for, I'm not going to say you won't use chars, but most of the time you'll probably use strings. I mostly use strings. So here, like I said, it represents a series of characters. So you use the keyword string, you create a variable, we call it hello, and you use double quotes when you assign a string. So instead of using single quotes, you use double quotes. And you can type out a sentence if you want. You can type a paragraph if you want. And you'll kind of see that in the next few examples. So here we have hello, and then we have string name. So it's going to print out hello Appaveli. So let's start without debugging. Hello Appaveli. And notice it's printing on two separate lines because it's writing, when you choose console and you call the write line method, it's going to write it and it's going to automatically go to the next line. So that's why it's hello Appaveli. All right. So let's comment this out. And let's focus on concatenating strings. We're going to concatenate hello and name, basically appending one string to another. That's what concatenating means when you're dealing with strings. So basically, we're going to call it console. Oh, why did I comment this out? An error. So let's. Okay. So we have hello name string, and we want to append this so it can be on the same line, right? So when we write this to the console, we're going to add a plus in between. So hello plus name. So it's basically appending my name after the hello string. Start without debugging. And there. So now notice it's appending the string, but there's no space in between. So that looks kind of tacky, right? So here, what we'll do is we'll add a space in between. So when you can also concatenate empty strings. So if you see here, there's a plus, and then you see down here, I'm appending a double quotes in between hello and name to create that space. So hello plus, and then double quotes, and then you space it. Because if you don't space it, it's pretty much the same thing as the previous line. So you add that space, it'll say hello Appaveli. So watch. See? Hello Appaveli, and then there's a space in between there. That's the difference. Now you can also use escape sequences by using, you know, tab, new line. There are a lot of escape sequences, and you'll see in the documentation in the show notes. So we'll go through a few escape sequences. So let's uncomment this section. We're going to use the tab. So basically, the tab basically gives in an extra space, right? So just like up here when we concatenated and separated these two, put a space in between hello and name, you can insert escape sequences like tab, new line, row. So let's take a look. See, there's an extra space. It's a tab. So when you compile it, you'll see this namespace. So let's let me see. Well, new line. So here it's essentially going to do the same thing as right line, as printing out to the right line to the console. So we're adding a new line after hello. So when you put a backslash in the end, that's indicating that go to the next line. Start without debugging. And again, hello Appaveli. Try to put this side by side so you can see. So here, hello string, hello Appaveli. Console.WriteLine, hello, concatenate, double quote, space, space between hello and Appaveli. Hello, concatenate, add a string, backslash tab, backslash T for extra tab. Console write line, hello, concatenate, backslash N to indicate that this is going to a new line. So now we're going to wrap this up. And we're going to talk about, we're going to use escape sequences, we're going to concatenate, and we're going to do this with rows and columns. So here I created 6 variables, string variables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I call it S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, S6 for simplicity. So it's basically indicating that these are strings. So here I'm going to create a row 1, right? And remember the tab escape sequence, basically it creates like okay, think of it this way. When you're typing a paper and you want to start a new paragraph, you hit the tab button. That's basically what it's doing here with this escape sequence. So it gives it that extra space, that margin. So we're going to have S1, S2, and S3, and we're going to insert a tab in between S1 and S2, and then in between S2 and S3. Then we'll create string row 2, and we'll insert a tab between S4 and S5, and in between S5 and S6. And then we're going to create another variable, and we're going to concatenate row 1 and row 2. And in the middle of row 1 and row 2, we'll insert a new line, and the console should print out rows and columns variable, which you'll see here. So here we go. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what you should do is play around with strings. I'll post links. The best way to learn is just to practice. Get an understanding of the basics, when you want to use strings, when you want to use a char. Come up with your own scenarios. Try different things. The best way you're going to learn is through trial and error. Don't think if you're starting to learn how to code, don't just think, oh, I got to build the next $1 billion app. No, you need to learn the basics, and this stuff might be a little boring, but it all makes sense when we build more applications. One thing I want to point it out before I wrap this up. So here you notice in the main method, it's static void main, right? So what happens if I remove the static keyword? No error so far, right? So watch what happens when I try to compile this. Oh, it says there were build errors. Would you like to continue and run the last successful build? We're going to say no. And here at the bottom, you'll see program does not contain a static main method suitable for an entry point. So if you have a method called main, it has to be static. So now let's insert the static keyword back, start without debugging, and it should run. So remember, every program has to have an entry point. If you have a class with no entry point, it's really useless. So, and you'll see as we talk about classes, struct, interfaces, when we go deeper into object-oriented programming, the concepts we'll talk about, especially building GUI applications. We're going to do a lot of exciting things with C#. So the next episode, I'm going to talk about primitives, like integers, doubles, floating points. We're going to convert a string into an integer, and we're also going to convert an integer into a string. So we'll talk about a lot of more different concepts or features of C# that you can do. But I want to introduce strings and characters because I thought it would be pretty simple. You can download this. Well, I guess you can download it. Now you can download the code off my GitHub. Wired In with Appaveli is the GitHub page. I'll have the link in the show notes, as well as you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Appaveli Podcast, also on Twitter at Appaveli Podcast, and you can like us on Facebook at Appaveli Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at pragmaticdev_solutions. You can follow me on Twitter at Appaveli. You can also follow me on Facebook, Pragmatic Dev Solutions. You can listen to the podcast on several platforms. Just go to appaveli.com and you can listen to the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. You can go to pragmaticdevsolutions.com. You can see some of our top apps in the Microsoft and Android and the Google Play Store. And that's it for this episode. I was kind of a little all over the place, but, I'm human. So I kind of jumped the gun and I forgot to go over basic input, but it kind of flowed well because I talked about chars, and then when I talked about basic input, it dealt with strings, and we transitioned right into strings. So I guess it worked out. But look at the code. Also, too, like I said, look at my code examples, look at the documentation, and try different things. Use the code example as a blueprint to write your own. And as we build and code more together, you'll get ideas and you'll be inspired to want to create your own applications. So that's it for this episode. Now I am going to go write some code after talking about code with all of you. So I hope you write code. I hope you're inspired. If you have any questions, like I said, you can contact me on my social media channels. I forgot to mention, we're also going to be on YouTube. So Wired In with Appaveli YouTube. If you listen to it on YouTube, you'll actually see the video. So if you're listening to this, you can follow along by looking at the code on the GitHub. So if you're on your phone listening, you can just go to github.com, type Wired In with Appaveli, click on episode 2, and you can follow along that way. And also too, the PowerPoint slides will be available. So that's it. And I am out.